This is the story of my childhood friend, Jake. He is in his early 30s, probably a little bit like you or me. He had been married to this amazing woman, Claire, for over 5 years. Claire, on the other hand, is in her late 20s, beautiful, and had always struggled with her weight. They were what people might call the perfect couple. He thought they were solid, right? But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. The thing is, Claire had always been on a weight loss journey. It wasn't something that was ever really a problem, per se, but it was there. She tried diets, gym memberships, workout programs, the works. Jake, he was supportive, always there for her, encouraging her to keep going when it got tough. He believed in her because, well, he loved her for who she was. She was smart, funny, kind. He honestly thought that nothing could break them apart. Not a silly thing like weight. But then, she started losing weight. A lot of it. At first, it was gradual. A few pounds here and there. Jake noticed, of course, but he didn't think much of it. She was working hard, and he was proud of her. But then something strange started to happen. Claire wasn't just dropping the pounds anymore, she was shedding a part of herself. The part that had once felt content in their comfortable life. Suddenly, she was different. Her confidence soared to new heights, and with it, so did her expectations. She began dressing differently, taking more care in how she looked, spending hours at the gym. Jake felt proud of her transformation, but there was this nagging feeling inside, like something was off. As the weeks went by, Claire's new life didn't just revolve around her health, it began to revolve around herself. She was a woman on fire, full of ambition, and with a newfound sense of independence that was becoming harder for Jake to ignore. She started going out more, hanging out with her friends, joining social circles that seemed, well, unfamiliar. The dinners they used to have, the quiet nights in, those became fewer and farther between. She wasn't at home as much, and when she was, there was this distant look in her eyes. And then came the conversation. Jake will never forget the day Claire sat him down in the living room, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite put his finger on, uncertainty, or maybe it was guilt. She took a deep breath, and before he could say anything, she dropped the bombshell. "Jake, I think I could do better," she said, her voice soft, but firm. "I think I deserve more than this." "More? More than what?" He stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. He thought she was talking about her career, or maybe her health goals, but then she said it. The words that changed everything. "I've been thinking a lot, and I don't know if I want to be with you anymore. I think I can do better." In that moment, it felt like the world stopped. Everything around him was muffled, like a bad dream where you can't wake up. How could she say that? He had done everything right, hadn't he? He supported her, loved her, and gave her everything he had. But it didn't seem like it mattered to Claire anymore. The woman who once couldn't imagine her life without him was now sitting across from him, saying she felt she could do better. And it hit him like a freight train, this was about him. But here's the thing about Jake. He wasn't the type of guy to just beg and plead. He could have fought for her, tried to convince her to stay. But he didn't. Instead, he sat there, took a deep breath, and did the hardest thing he'd ever had to do. He let her go. That was the moment everything changed for him. In one instant, he lost the woman he thought he'd grow old with. And honestly, it felt like a gut punch. But here's the crazy part, he didn't fall apart. No, Jake wasn't that kind of guy. Instead, he stood up, walked away, and started building the life he had always dreamed of, but never had the time for. He began focusing on his passions, working harder than ever, and pushing himself to places he never thought possible. The weight of the breakup didn't crush him, it motivated him. But you're probably wondering, what happened next? I guess you'll just have to stick around and see how things unfold. Okay, let's dive into the storm that's about to hit Jake's life. So, after he let Claire go, he didn't waste any time wallowing. He was too busy. Too focused. It wasn't like he was jumping into another relationship. Hell, he wasn't even interested in dating. He was building his own empire, bit by bit. New business ventures, a renewed gym routine, hobbies he'd abandoned years ago. He was putting in the work, grinding like he had nothing to lose. And at first, that felt like the biggest win. Every day was a new victory for him. He was finally free, finally living life on his terms. But here's the thing, no matter how hard you work, no matter how much you pour yourself into something, life has this sneaky way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect it. And that's exactly what happened to Jake. It started with a text. Just one message from Claire. The kind of message you never think you'll get, especially after a breakup like theirs. I've been thinking about you, about us. Jake stared at the phone for what felt like an eternity. He didn't know what to do with it. Should he reply? Ignore it? Pretend it never existed? He'd moved on, right? But the text, that simple message, sent his mind spinning back in time. What did she mean by that? Was she coming back? Was she just confused? Or was she testing the waters? All these questions flooded his mind, and he felt his heart rate pick up. He didn't want to go down that road again, but part of him, maybe even the most vulnerable part, wondered if there was still something left between them. But that wasn't the worst part. The real kicker came when Claire showed up at his gym. He didn't know she even knew he was there. He hadn't told her about it, but apparently, she'd figured it out. He was working on his deadlifts, music blasting in his ears, when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around to find her standing there, looking better than ever, thinner, more confident, a grin on her face that made his stomach flip. "Hey, stranger," she said, like everything was normal. Like they weren't in the middle of a divorce. Like she hadn't just torn his heart apart months ago. Jake froze, unsure of what to say. "Claire, what are you doing here?" She shrugged, her eyes flickering with something he couldn't place. "I was in the area. Thought I'd stop by. It's good to see you." The words hung in the air, awkward, loaded with history. Claire, standing there with her toned arms and that familiar yet foreign smile, suddenly felt like a stranger. Jake was hit with this overwhelming wave of confusion. What was she doing? Why now? Why after all this time? She leaned in closer, almost too close, and Jake's stomach tightened. He wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't ready for her to come back into his world, shaking things up all over again. But there she was, as if she never left. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Claire continued, her voice softer now. "About everything." Jake's pulse quickened. Was this it? Was this the moment she was going to apologize, tell him how much she regretted leaving him? Was she ready to come back? But instead, she hit him with something that he didn't see coming. "I'm seeing someone," she said, almost casually, like it was no big deal. "It's been a few months, actually." The world felt like it just dropped out from under him. His breath caught in his throat, his mind scrambling to make sense of her words. She's moved on. So quickly? After everything they'd been through, after everything he'd done for her, this was the payback? It was like a slap in the face. "Wait," Jake stammered, trying to keep his cool. "You've moved on already?" Claire nodded. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no remorse in her voice. She wasn't looking for forgiveness. She wasn't trying to patch things up. She had clearly found someone else, someone new, and Jake was just another chapter in her past. The air between them felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. Jake stood there, trying to process the fact that she had moved on without him, no second chances, no regret. It stung, it really did. But at the same time, something deep inside of him was waking up, something raw and untapped. Was he really going to let this woman, the one who had walked away from him, continue to dictate how he felt? Before he could say anything more, Claire gave him a quick, almost dismissive smile. "Anyway, I just wanted to let you know. Take care, Jake." And with that, she turned around and walked out of his life again, leaving him standing there, caught in a whirlwind of emotions. She didn't even look back. It wasn't just the fact that she'd moved on, it was the way she moved on. The ease, the confidence. He had poured everything into their relationship, and now it felt like it had all been for nothing. And now she was just walking away like it didn't even matter. But this wasn't just about Claire anymore. No, this was about Jake realizing something important. He had let her go, sure, but that didn't mean he had let her go. This new chapter of his life wasn't going to be about surviving her absence. It was about thriving in the face of everything that had been taken from him. He was pissed, yeah. But more than that, he was determined to show her, and himself, that he could do better too. He wasn't going to fall back into old habits. Not this time. Alright, let's pick up the pace here. After that unexpected gym encounter with Claire, Jake was a mess. He didn't show it on the outside, though. No, he was still putting on a brave face, cracking jokes with his buddies at work, posting about his workouts, sharing motivational quotes on social media like he had it all together. But inside? Inside, everything felt like it was falling apart. You know that feeling when you think you're over something, but then someone just hits that one nerve and you feel like you're back at square one? That's exactly how it was for Jake. He had worked so damn hard to get to a place where he felt like he was finally in control of his life. He'd built himself up from nothing, pulled himself out of a pit, and now here was Claire, waltzing back into his life like a hurricane, disrupting everything. But Jake wasn't about to let her see how much it bothered him. Not after everything. Not after all the work he'd put in. So, he did what he did best, he doubled down. The next day, he hit the gym even harder. He spent more time on his business. His friends started noticing the difference in him. He was more focused, more driven, almost like a completely different person. He started pushing himself in ways he never had before. He didn't just want to succeed anymore, he needed it. Still, something about Claire's words stayed with him, like a thorn lodged in his side. "I'm seeing someone." It wasn't the breakup that stung, it was the fact that she'd found someone else so quickly. And that thought? It festered in his brain. There was this part of Jake, though, that was trying to fight back, trying to tell himself, it's fine. It's her loss. She doesn't matter anymore. But every time he saw her on social media, looking happy with her new guy, he felt this gnawing ache. It was like he was stuck in a loop, constantly comparing himself to the guy who had come in and scooped up his ex-wife without even breaking a sweat. It wasn't jealousy. Well, okay, maybe it was a little. But it wasn't just about her moving on, it was about him realizing that he was still stuck in the past while she was out there living her best life. And that realization, it hit him harder than anything she had ever said. Then came the turning point. The thing that would make Jake stop wallowing and start moving forward for real. One night, when he was in his apartment after a long day, he got a text from his business partner. It was about an opportunity, a big one. The kind that could change everything. Jake had been working on his side hustle for a while now, something he had been quietly building when he wasn't at the gym or dealing with the aftermath of his divorce. But this was huge. It was the kind of opportunity most people would dream about. A new product line. A potential investment. This could be the breakthrough he had been waiting for. But the moment that phone buzzed, he froze. For a second, He thought about the last time he'd been this excited about something. He realized it was when Claire had been by his side, when they were both dreaming about the future together. They had talked about growing together, building something lasting. But now, it felt like that dream was all in the past, like he was living in someone else's story. He thought about it for a moment, about throwing everything he had into this new venture, making it work, proving to everyone, including Claire, that he was capable of so much more. And then, he did something that felt a little reckless, but also right. He sent the text back to his business partner, "Let's do this. I'm in." No second guessing. No hesitation. For the first time in months, Jake felt something shift in him. It wasn't just about building a business. It wasn't just about success or showing Claire he could do better. It was about proving something to himself, that he didn't need her to be complete. That he was worthy of success, worthy of happiness, without anyone's validation. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Jake dove headfirst into the new project. His phone barely stopped buzzing. He stayed up late working on designs, coordinating meetings, making calls. He even started networking with people who had once seemed out of his league, mentors, investors, people who could actually help him take things to the next level. And the more he worked, the more he saw the results. His energy was through the roof. Every morning, he woke up feeling like he was on a mission. Every night, he fell asleep feeling satisfied with the progress he had made. But Claire, oh, Claire. She wasn't exactly out of the picture. Every now and then, she would pop up in his life. A casual text here, a comment on his Instagram there. It wasn't like she was trying to rekindle anything, but it was clear that she was watching. Watching him. Watching his life unfold. Watching him succeed. Jake didn't know what to make of it. Did she want to come back? Was she curious about the man he was becoming? Or was she just bored, looking for validation, for something to fill the void? But Jake wasn't interested in trying to figure it out anymore. He wasn't going to let her pull him back into that emotional roller coaster. He had a new life now. One that he had built for himself. One that didn't involve Claire. Still, there were moments when the questions lingered. Was it enough to just keep building? Or was he still searching for something more? Something deeper? He didn't have the answers yet. But he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't the same person who had let her go. He wasn't that guy anymore. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to like this new version of himself. It was one of those days when everything felt like it was about to explode. Jake had been hustling non-stop for weeks, pouring his heart and soul into this new venture. His life was moving fast, and for the first time, he wasn't worried about where he was headed, he was excited. He had started making connections with some serious players in his field, and everything was clicking. It felt like his hard work was finally paying off, and he could feel it. Success was coming. He could taste it. But of course, life has a funny way of pulling the rug out from under you when you think you're standing on solid ground. He was just finishing up a meeting with a potential investor when he saw the notification. It was from Claire. Again? She had been sending these cryptic messages every now and then, just enough to keep him on edge. Each one felt like she was testing the waters, seeing if he'd bite. And every time, Jake ignored them. He was better than that. He had moved on. Right? But this message was different. "I'm coming by your place later. I need to talk." Just like that, his heart rate shot up. There was no reason for Claire to be reaching out like this. She had her new life, her new guy, and her new reality. Why was she suddenly showing up now? What the hell did she want from him? Jake didn't know whether to be pissed or curious. He paced around his apartment for a few minutes, trying to talk himself out of it. "She's just looking for closure," or validation, or whatever. Don't let her mess with your head again. But then there was that gnawing feeling, the same one that had been lurking in the back of his mind every time she popped up. Could this be the moment when things finally came full circle? Was this his chance to truly show her how much he had grown, how much better his life had become without her? He grabbed a glass of water, took a deep breath, and decided he wasn't going to let her get under his skin this time. He wasn't the same guy who had begged for her back. He wasn't the guy who had put his life on hold. He had a purpose now, and it wasn't going to be derailed by some impulsive visit from his ex-wife. He'd moved on, he was better now. A few hours later, there was a knock at his door. His stomach churned. He opened it, and there she was, Claire. Looking as stunning as ever, but this time there was a different energy about her. She wasn't the confident woman he had seen on social media or at the gym. This woman looked vulnerable. Her eyes were tired, like she'd been carrying something heavy. "Jake," she said, her voice quieter than usual, "can we talk?" Jake stepped aside, letting her in, but he wasn't about to make this easy for her. He wasn't about to pretend that everything was fine just because she wanted to come back into his life. They sat down. The silence between them was thick, almost suffocating. Jake could feel the weight of it, but he wasn't going to crack. He was done with trying to figure her out, done with playing the game. He wanted answers, but more than that, he wanted closure. The kind of closure he hadn't gotten when she walked away. "I don't even know where to start," Claire began, her voice wavering. I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us." Jake raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He wasn't going to let her lead this conversation. He wasn't going to give her the power. "I thought I was doing the right thing, you know? I thought that I needed to leave in order to find myself, to find something better," she continued, her hands fidgeting nervously in her lap. "But the more I've been living my life, the more I've realized I've been lying to myself." Jake's heart pounded. There it was. He knew she was going to say something like this, but hearing it out loud? It hit differently. Lying to herself? What did that mean? What did she expect him to say? "I thought I could do better," Claire confessed, her eyes meeting his for the first time since she'd entered the apartment. "But I've realized that what I had with you, it was real. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And I took it for granted. I took you for granted." Jake felt his breath catch in his chest. There it was again, the thing he'd been secretly waiting for. That moment when she finally admitted what he had always suspected. But now, it didn't feel like the victory he thought it would. It felt hollow. It felt like something was missing. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice steady. "You want to pick up where we left off? Start over?" Claire shook her head. "No," she said softly. "I don't think that's what I want. I think I just need to know that I didn't mess up everything for nothing. I need to know that you're okay. That you're doing better." The words hung in the air, and Jake could feel the weight of them, the subtle hint of regret in her voice. But at that moment, he realized something that had been simmering under the surface for a while now. He didn't need her validation. He didn't need her to tell him he was okay. He had already proven that to himself. He had already done better, without her. So he stood up, walked to the window, and stared out into the city skyline. There was no bitterness. No anger. Just clarity. "I'm fine, Claire," he said, turning back to face her. "I'm better than I've ever been." For the first time in a long time, Jake finally felt like he was in control. After Claire left that day, Jake sat there for a while, staring out the window. The city lights shimmered beneath the early evening sky, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the world was his again. He didn't feel anger or resentment bubbling up like he used to. There was a strange kind of peace in him now, one that hadn't been there before. It wasn't about proving anything to Claire anymore. It wasn't about revenge or showing her what she was missing. It was about something deeper. It was about realizing that the person who had the most power over his life wasn't her, it was him. Jake had spent so much time, so many years, thinking his happiness depended on Claire, on their relationship, on her love. He had wrapped up his sense of worth in her approval. But now, in this quiet moment, he realized something important. He didn't need her validation to feel whole. He didn't need anyone to tell him that he was enough. He had always been enough. He had just needed to believe it for himself. It wasn't like everything was perfect now. Far from it. Life was still messy, unpredictable. Jake still had bad days. He still wrestled with doubts. There were moments when he missed the woman he had loved, when the memory of their good times together would sneak up on him, making his chest tighten. But those moments didn't define him anymore. He knew now that he could get through them. He was stronger than he realized. His business was taking off. The momentum was building. The investors were biting. His hard work was finally starting to pay off in ways he could feel and see. Every time he nailed a deal or made progress on a project, he felt this rush of satisfaction. It wasn't about the money, though that was nice. It was about the fact that he had built something from scratch. He had created his future with his own hands, not depending on anyone or anything. It was his. And then there was the gym. He had stayed consistent, driven by more than just the desire to look good. It was about pushing himself to become the best version of himself, physically and mentally. Each workout, each rep, was like another small victory. His body was changing, his mind was sharpening, and he was becoming more resilient in ways he never thought possible. Jake's friends noticed the change, too. They could see the difference in him, not just the outward transformation, but the inner one. He wasn't the same guy who had been crushed by a breakup. He was stronger, more confident. He wasn't waiting for life to happen to him anymore. He was making it happen. They could see it in the way he carried himself, the way he spoke about his goals. It was infectious. They wanted to be around him because he wasn't just living his life, he was building it. One evening, not long after Claire's visit, Jake was out with his buddies at a bar. It had been a while since they'd hung out like this, just a few beers, some laughs, no pressure. They were talking about life, business, and the usual. Jake was feeling good, confident, when suddenly one of his friends brought up something unexpected. "Man, I gotta ask. Have you seen Claire lately? She's been posting all this stuff on Instagram, looking like she's living her best life. Kind of weird, don't you think?" Jake raised an eyebrow. His friend was right, he had seen the posts. Claire had been out with her new guy, happy, smiling, living this picture-perfect life that seemed to have everything Jake used to want. For a moment, the old feelings stirred inside him, but this time, it wasn't bitterness or envy. It was just indifference. "Yeah, I've seen it," Jake said, his voice steady. "But honestly, I don't care anymore." His friend looked at him, surprised. "You don't care? You sure?" Jake nodded, his lips curling into a small smile. "I've got my own life now. And it's better than I ever imagined." The words felt right. Jake wasn't just saying them to convince himself. He believed them. He had learned that the key to moving forward wasn't about holding onto the past, or trying to outdo anyone else. It was about creating something that was uniquely his, something no one could take away from him. As the night wore on, the conversation drifted to other things. Jake found himself feeling more and more at peace with his life, with his choices, with where he was headed. There was no need to compete with Claire's new life. He didn't need to prove anything. What mattered now was the life he was living, and he was proud of it. the truth was, Jake had come a long way. And it wasn't just because he'd built a successful business or transformed his body. It was because he had learned to trust himself. He had stopped depending on others for his happiness and started relying on his own strength. He had let go of the past and embraced the future, one step at a time. Claire, in a way, had been a catalyst. She had shown him what he didn't want, and in the process, she had helped him discover what he truly needed. But in the end, it wasn't about her. It was about him. It always had been. Jake didn't need Claire to validate his worth anymore. He didn't need her to prove anything to him. He had already proven everything he needed to prove to himself. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.